If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate.
And if you're a honey badger, you have no regard for other animals. You don't care.
If you're a panda with twins, it's normal to abandon one to take care of the other.
But if humans do any of these things, we would call it wrong, unfair, or unjust.
Yeah, why is that? Why do humans care so much about justice?
Well, the Bible has a fascinating response to that question. On page 1, humans are set apart from all other creatures as the image of God.
Yeah, God's representatives who rule the world by his definition of good and evil.
And this identity, it's the bedrock of the Bible's view of justice. All humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness no matter who you are.
And that would be nice if we all did that. But we know how the world really works.
And the Bible addresses that too. It shows how we are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantage at the expense of others.
Yeah, self-preservation. And the weaker someone is, the easier it is to take advantage of them.
And so in the biblical story, we see this happening on a personal level, but also in families, and then in communities, and in whole civilizations that create injustice, especially towards the vulnerable. But the story doesn't end there. Out of this whole mess, God chose a man named Abraham to start a new kind of family. Specifically, Abraham was to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice.
Yeah, doing righteousness, that's a Bible word I don't really use, but what comes to mind is being a good person.
But what does that even mean, being good? The biblical Hebrew word for righteousness is tzedakah, and it's more specific. It's an ethical standard that refers to right relationships between people. It's about treating others as the image of God,
With the God-given dignity they deserve.
And this word justice, it's the Hebrew word mishpat. It can refer to retributive justice.
Like if I steal something, I pay the consequences.
Exactly. Yet most often in the Bible, mishpat refers to restorative justice. It means going a step further, actually seeking out vulnerable people who are being taken advantage of and helping them.
Yeah, some people call this charity.
But mishpat involves way more. It means taking steps to advocate for the vulnerable and changing social structures to prevent injustice.
So justice and righteousness are about a radical, selfless way of life.
Yeah, and you find this idea all over the Bible. Like here, in the book of Proverbs, what does it mean to bring about just righteousness?
Open your mouth for those who can't speak for themselves.
And what do these words mean for the prophets, like Jeremiah?
Rescue the disadvantaged, and don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow.
And like here, look in the book of Psalms.
The Lord God upholds justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, and sets the prisoner free. But he thwarts the way of the wicked. Whoa, he thwarts the wicked?
Yeah, in Hebrew, the word wicked is rasha. It means guilty or in the wrong. It refers to someone who mistreats another human, ignoring their dignity as an image of God.
So justice and righteousness is a big deal to God.
Yes, it's what Abraham's family, the Israelites, were to be all about. They ended up as immigrant slaves being oppressed unjustly in Egypt. And so God confronted Egypt's evil, declaring them to be rasha, guilty of injustice. And so he rescued Israel. But the tragic irony of the Old Testament story is that these redeemed people went on to commit the same acts of injustice against the vulnerable. And so God sent prophets who declared Israel guilty.
But they weren't the only ones. There's injustice everywhere.
Yeah, some people actively perpetrate injustice. Others receive benefits or privileges from unjust social structures they take for granted. And sadly, history has shown that when the oppressed gain power, they often become oppressors themselves.
So we all participate in injustice, actively or passively, even unintentionally. We're all the guilty ones.
And so this is the surprising message of the biblical story. God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice is to give us a gift, the life of Jesus. He did righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be the righteous one when he rose from the dead. And so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of anything they've done, but because of what Jesus did for them.
The earliest followers of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God, not just as a new status, but as a power that changed their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways.
Yeah, if God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others.
This is a radical way of life, and it's not always convenient or easy. It's courageously making other people's problems my problems.
This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about a lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, humans, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Amen. What a great video to illustrate a lifetime commitment to what God's plan is for justice. Well, I'm excited to be with everyone this morning. Good morning. Wow. Before we get into our teaching for the weekend, I wanted to take a quick moment to introduce you to one of my greatest role models, who in my opinion is the best representation of what justice and compassion is. And it's this lady right here on the screen, Mother Maddie Brooks. But I have the privilege of calling her Grandma. Graham just turned 91 last month. And we are so blessed as a family. Amen. Yeah. You know, she was and still is a great example of seeing a need and filling a need. And throughout the years, she has created a legacy in each of us by teaching our family the importance of reaching high. And as we reach high, we take up somebody else so that we can bring somebody else with us so that we can all feel success. And her passion for giving, it has transcended down through her 4 children, her 9 grandchildren, and I'm one of those 9, and her 10 great-grandchildren. So we are right now in the final stages of establishing a scholarship for community service in her name at her alma mater. So we are definitely celebrating her work of justice throughout her lifetime. So thank you for letting me take that moment to share with you. And now, let's get down. Amen? All right. So with this being Justice Weekend, we pay tribute to the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The foundation of his activism and justice and equality is deeply rooted in the principles of God's Word, specifically carrying the definition of justice through the eyes of God and his relationship to his people as outlined in the Bible. We're going to talk about that today. The title of today's teaching is Compassion is Justice. Our biblical foundation for our teaching today comes from the book of Micah in the Old Testament. Now, Micah was a prophet. And for those of you that don't know what a prophet is, it was a person, man or woman, that was inspired by God to give a message from God to the people. And throughout the whole book of Micah, the message from the Lord is God is saying, we got to do something about the treatment of people during this time. Well, in the 6th chapter, we zone in on the 8th verse, which is what our focus today is. And it reads, "And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with God?" Now, if you're like me, you want the juice. You want the whole story, right? How in the world do we get to the place where this was the message that God wanted delivered to his people? Well, let's start here. Back in the day, if a prophet were to give a word to the people, it was usually a word of correction, which meant that people had fallen off track, and the prophet was coming to give them a message to say, you got to get it together. Well, when you think about Israel, this seemed to be a pattern back in the Old Testament, because what would happen, God would deliver them out of a very intense situation because they were his chosen people. They would get in right relationship with him, really kind of get close to God, do all the things that God wanted them to do, and then slowly they would start to fall away from God. They would forget the things that God had done for them and forget the things that God had taught them. And what would happen is a prophet would come deliver that word of correction, then they would correct themselves, and then the pattern would start all over again. We're reading through the first 5 chapters of the book of Micah. Before we get into the verse that we talked about, it's made very clear why God had to deliver such a message. There were behaviors that were being displayed by the people of Israel, and more specifically, the leaders that God was not pleased with. For example, they were creating images and idols that they were worshiping instead of worshiping God, the one who delivered them from out of all their mess. They were profiting off of women's bodies. They were abusing their power with the leadership that they were given. They would desire the property of those who didn't even have much at all, and they would still take it anyway. They would steal the inheritance of people for their own personal gain. Now, the list can go on and on and on because they were doing a bunch of stuff. Now, if you're like me, you think, man, this is crazy. Like, this is some crazy behavior, especially to think that these were God's chosen people. How could they behave in this kind of manner? Well, what does God do in response to this? Well, he calls a gentleman named Micah from a small town, which is also known as a poor town called Moresheth. And God gives Micah a vision regarding the 2 cities in Israel, Judah and Samaria. Now, these cities had the wealthiest and the most privileged classes of society in that day. And after Micah received the vision from the Lord, he travels to Judah and Samaria, and he delivers the word, and he basically says, listen, Israel, you guys are messing up. What you're doing is unacceptable, and God is calling you out as if you're on a witness stand. And he's saying God is about to disrupt this whole operation because what you're doing is not right. Now, God asked the question, well, my people, Israel, what have I done to you? Answer me. In other words, God is asking, tell me exactly, Israel, how I have inconvenienced you that would cause you to do the exact opposite of what I chose you for. Well, let's check the record. Israel, you were a people that was enslaved for centuries. Well, who brought you out of that craziness? During the times that you were wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, there were 3 times where a curse came upon you. But I took that curse and I flipped it around into a blessing. And then what about when you came across all those obstacles that seemed impossible to get out of? Who was the one that was faithful to bring you out of it every single time? Was that an inconvenience to you, giving you mercy and being faithful during your time of need? Now, I don't know about you, but after hearing that from God, I'd be like, oh, Lord, I'm so sorry, right? Because after hearing this is what they did. They had a reaction of their own. They were trying to figure out, well, how can we get back into God's favor? So they took out their checklist and started to think about, okay, God, well, what'll it be? What are the things that we can do to get back into your good favor? Well, God, I know you like burnt offerings, so we have some baby cows here that are just a little under a year old. So you can have those because you like living sacrifices. But wait, God, there's more. We got some more things for you. Let's add 1,000, maybe thousands of rams to the offering of these baby cows. Would you be pleased with that? Oh, but wait, God, we got some more stuff that we can give you. You know how valuable oil is to us in this time. Well, we have enough oil that can fill 10,000 rivers. How does that cover these charges that you're trying to push against us? But God, wait a minute. I got one more thing that I can offer you. God, you can take my firstborn. Is that enough to offer you for the sin that we have committed before you to get back into your good favor? Well, the prophet Micah interjects and he's like, you guys just don't get it. You don't get it. These are things that God already owns. He is not looking after your stuff. He is simply asking, number one, what am I requiring of you? All I'm asking of you is to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly before God. See, they wanted to offer a checklist, but God was more interested in what was in their heart. Why? Because justice is a matter of the heart. See, God says to Israel, look, Israel, when I delivered you from being enslaved, when I fed you and provided for you when you were in the desert, when I protected you from all other nations from taking advantage of you, that was me using my power, using what I had to make your situation better. Not just because I love you, but so that you could see an example of what was in my heart for people, so that when you saw people in those kinds of situations, you would do the same thing. I didn't give you favor to capitalize on greed and wealth. I didn't give you influence so that you could take advantage of people. I gave you favor so that you could use what I gave you to make somebody else's life better. In other words, I blessed you so that you can bless somebody else. God says, I chose you, Israel. You're my chosen one. I chose you, Johnny. I chose you, Michael. I chose you, Angela. I chose you, Warnell. I chose you, Bay Church, to be my hands, to be my feet, to be a representation of compassion and what a compassionate heart is. Why? Because you firsthand have experienced my compassionate heart. Point one, fill it in. God values a compassionate heart. Now, we are not too far from Israel and their behaviors. I would invite you in this moment to take inventory of yourselves. How often do we pull out our own checklist towards God so that we can get on God's good side, so that we can remain in God's good favor? Well, here's an example of a checklist that I think most of us might have. Go to church. Check. Attend a small group. Check. Listen to worship music instead of other music. Check. Read the Bible. Check. Now, these are great things to do. Don't get me wrong. They're great things to do. But as we are actively trying to check off the list, how many people do we pass on the way to church that are holding signs that say, I'm hungry? On our way to that small group, how many kids do you see walking around in the rain with no coat or no umbrella? See, we can check boxes all day, but the question is, are we checking the right boxes? I remember a time when I was getting ready to start a new job. And when you start a new job, you want to make a good impression. You want to be on time. You want to do everything you're supposed to do, demonstrate good character, all that good stuff. So I'm trying to be on time. That's my value. I hate being late. And I left the house with plenty of time for me to get where I needed to go. And I looked down at the gas gauge, and I'm like, oh, man, I need some gas. So I look at the clock. All right. Well, now you got enough time. Go ahead, stop, get some gas. You'll be to work, still be able to have some good time to get there on time. So as I fill up the gas tank and I'm getting ready to get back into the car, I hear, excuse me, sir. I'm like looking around like somebody talking to me. I hear it again, excuse me, sir. And so I look up and this gentleman is coming towards me. And so I'm looking at him and he holds his hands up and he says, I don't want any trouble. He says, my wife and I are homeless. Our camp is right over here, right up under the freeway. And I just came over to you wondering if you could just help us out by getting us something to eat. Now, the first thing I'm thinking in my mind is, all right, do I got time? Because I'm trying to get to work. I'm just starting this new job. I don't want to be late. But then I think, oh, we at the gas station. He can run in here, get him whatever he wants. He can eat. I get to work on time. Everybody's happy. So I respond to him. I say, yeah, man, sure. Look, let's go ahead and come in here and get something to eat. You can get whatever you want. And his response to me got me. He said, sir, I don't mean to sound ungrateful. He said, but for the money that you could spend in this gas station, you could probably get a whole lot more bang for your buck if we just travel down the street to the grocery store, and that food is even healthier. I mean, would you feed your family from this food in the gas station? Gut punch, right? So needless to say, I got back in the car, I went to the grocery store, and I got them some food, some water, hygiene supplies. And what I learned from this situation is sometimes you have to suspend the rules to do the right thing, even if it's not on the checklist. See, I'm grateful to God that I personally have never had a hungry day. But here's the thing, God gave me that favor, and how is it that I could experience that favor of God of never being hungry and see someone who is hungry and not feel that need? That, my friends, is justice. Point 2, fill it in. Making time for compassion is making time for God. In the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verse 42 through 45, Jesus says these words, "For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They will also answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and didn't help you?" And he will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me." In the book of James, chapter 1, verse 22, he writes, But prove yourselves doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For anyone who is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was." In his last Sunday sermon at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke these words. He said, "The time is always right to do what is right." See, we must be doers, not just hearers, not just see something that represents justice and kindness on social media and click a like button, but we must be the hands and feet of God and put it into action. So let me tell you about a kid named DJ that I used to work with. I was DJ's counselor, and we met when DJ was 13 years old. By the time DJ came to me as a counselor, he had many horrible life experiences that had disrupted the natural mental and emotional processes. DJ had been abandoned by both parents, lived in foster care for a bit. Then he was found by a grandparent, reunited with family, but then the grandparent died, and no one in the family wanted to care for DJ, so started living in the streets. Lived a life of crime and was abused sexually through sex trafficking. Basic needs weren't being met, and you could forget about going to school. So eventually DJ ended up in juvenile hall, which eventually led him to the place where I worked. The place where I counseled kids had a practice and a motto that we were going to give kids treatment and care unconditionally and not kick them out for those negative behaviors that got them to our place in the first place. But knowing this gave DJ a free pass sometimes to be aggressive to some of the other kids and sometimes some of the adult counselors like myself. I can recall a time where DJ would punch the first staff that was in his path when he was told the word no. We decided that we wanted to give DJ and some of the other kids an opportunity that most kids like them don't get to have. We traveled down to a very popular amusement park down in Southern California. We spent 3 days there, and when it was time to drive back, DJ refused to leave the hotel room. After hours of being prompted and persuaded, his anger started to build up. And so he got out the bed, took a coffee pot in the hotel room, chucked it up against the wall, and the glass shattered. And before we all could get in there to contain the situation, DJ had grabbed a piece of that glass and he slashed me in the face. Now, as a counselor, you can't retaliate. because you understand that these behaviors that are coming from kids like DJ are a result of the injustices that they have experienced throughout their life. And furthermore, they had already experienced a great deal of abuse. Why perpetuate that when you have the power to show them something different? So, out of all the lives that DJ could have chosen, it's not like he had a conversation with God and said, God, this is the life that I want. But it was a life that he was given. There are also times where DJ struggled with thoughts and even actions of suicide. I spent hours counseling DJ to come off the roof. Sometimes DJ would climb to the top of the basketball hoop and sit on the rim, contemplating whether or not to end his life. It was one time I had sat next to DJ for my entire shift, waiting for him to hand over metal shards that he had collected from dental floss because he was attempting to take his life that night. My message and my words to DJ on that day were simply this: I'm not going anywhere until I know you're safe. Just let me know when you're ready to hand it over. Next month, we'll make 17 years of knowing DJ. And I still hear from DJ from time to time. Voicemail, email, Mr. Warnell, I got a job at Round Table and I'm doing good. Or another message says, Mr. Warnell, I violated my probation, so I'm in jail for a couple of months. But I remember what you and the other counselors taught me when I come out of this place, I promise you I'm gonna get back on track. I just wanted you to know that I hadn't forgotten you. Or this message, Mr. Warnell, I'm calling to tell you that I got accepted into a counseling program in college and I'm doing my internship at a group home. And I don't know how you and them other counselors had the patience to work with kids like me, because I'm trying to work with these kids and it's hard work. But I'm not giving up though, because you guys didn't give up on me. You saw me as a person. You gave me hope when I was hopeless. Mr. Warnell, you were like a dad to me. My most recent contact with DJ was an email. Dear Mr. Warnell, I'm graduating from Stanford with my master's in education. You have no idea what it would mean if you came to my graduation. I'll be teaching at a school in Oakland, 6th and 7th grade science. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about you and those other counselors. I'm crying as I write this, but I'm crying tears of joy. See, I'm no hero. God is the hero. I wasn't too far from being a kid like DJ myself. And if it wasn't for my grandmother who pulled me out of a crazy situation and saved my life, she, through God, gave me a great example of compassion and justice and mercy so that then I could pass that same gift to kids like DJ. Now, DJ is not just a boy. DJ is also a girl. DJ is rich, DJ is poor, DJ is black, white, Latino. DJ is a representation of so many kids that I've worked with over the course of 17 years. But what I love to believe, actually not just believe it, what I know is a reality, is because of the compassionate work that went into kids like DJ, there's one less jail cell that's filled up. There's one less suicide, right? There's one less mass shooting that takes place. And these are situations that impact us all. See, DJ is not just a kid, but it is also DJ, doing justice. In his acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize, Dr. King spoke these words. He said, I have the audacity to believe that everyone will have 3 meals a day for their bodies, that they will have education and culture for their minds, and dignity and equality and freedom for their spirits. So what does God want from us? Number one, he wants us to do justice. which is simply to do the right thing. When you're in the situation and you see something wrong, don't just sit back. Do something about it. God is requiring us also for the second thing, to love kindness, to show mercy to our brother and our sister that might have less than us or might be in a crazy situation. Because that is what God would do for us. The word tells us that we wake up with brand new mercies every morning. And that same mercy deserves to be passed on each and every day. And the third thing that God is requiring of us is to walk humbly, which is simply looking at somebody else's problems and saying, because we're one, because your destiny is tied to my destiny and my destiny is tied to your destiny, I'm going to make your problem my problem. I'm going to be there for you in a tough time, even if it makes me step out of my comfort zone. So I ask you today as I close, how do you make DJ a part of your life? What or who is your DJ? Maybe it is adopt a school. Maybe it's volunteering at a women's shelter. Maybe it's becoming an advocate and an activist for equality in your community. Just know that somebody is waiting for a blessing from the Lord, and that blessing is in your hands. That blessing is in what you can speak to them. That blessing is in your actions. But whatever God has blessed you with, use it to make someone else's life a better one so that we all can experience God's love. Because compassion is justice. God bless you today.